also said that the extent of damage is yet to be assessed. Now, it was being anticipated that US might step in the conflict between Iran and Israel, and that has finally happened. US has actually bombed Iranian nuclear sites, and it has strike Fordo and two other nuclear sites that includes Natanz, and US jets dropped the bombs at these Iranian nuclear sites. In fact, Iran has also confirmed about these US strikes, but it has said that the extent of damage is yet to be assessed. Donald Trump will be addressing shortly on the Iranian strikes. In fact, my colleague Shivani is now joining us with more details on this. Shivani, big escalation in the war between Iran and Israel. Now, US has stepped in fact, bombed the nuclear sites in Iran. What more details are we gathering?
Anjali, this can be the biggest turning point of this conflict that has already entered the 10th day. And I'm right now in Tel Aviv in Israel. And there were some expectations from Israel that United States might bomb the nuclear sites in Isfahan and other areas inside Iran. And sometime back from now, US President Donald Trump has himself confirmed, putting that post on social, that three important sites that have been hit by the B-2 bombers that were being shown to move towards the Guam Air Base and the other island in Indian Ocean region. So now it has been confirmed that Natanz, Isfahan, and the other one, the Fordo, these three sites have been totally destroyed. That's the confirmation that's coming in from the President Donald Trump. Not only this, he has also said in his post that all these bombers are now out of Iran. There's none of these air assets now are inside Iran. That means they are totally safe. They have completed their mission and they have come out of the airspace of Iran. So that is a big achievement on the part of United States. And United States President has also, after that post, put out a flag of United States, probably showing the victory of this particular mission. But yes, this is certainly a game-changing point in this whole conflict, and Israel might be ready for some more retaliatory strikes from Iran. I'm right now in Israel. So the moment these missiles move inside Israel's air territory, there is an alert that is sounded and everybody moves to the shelter. So Israel is ready. Yesterday was a little peaceful because there was no information of a big attack from Iran inside the areas in Israel. That means now Iran might be countering and in a phase to reach back, to retaliate, to react after this big blow has come to it from United States.
Absolutely, Shivani. Also, contrary to what happened just after these attacks that were carried out by United States, now Donald Trump has posted calling out for peace, that peace is the solution.
See, certainly, US President Donald Trump had said that he had given enough time to Iran for negotiations. He had given 60 days, but after those 60 days, he was in no mood for negotiation. You remember he had left the G7 summit abruptly. He said, for obvious reasons, I had to go. That means he was preparing for this kind of action from United States on Iran. And that has come true now. He also said and indicated that there is something going to be a very decisive sort of operation from United States, and that has come. So now no negotiations. The indication was for this particular action that was going to take place, Anjali. But yes, certainly this is a big action that has come from United States, and reactions from Iran have already started to come in. That now everybody in the US nationals in Iran are legitimate targets. That's the kind of statement that is coming in from Iran. So now this can be a further escalation if Iran tries to target US people inside Iran or US establishments inside Iran. So this can take a this can take a turn, and it can become a further escalated war with United States as a party. Till now only Iran and Israel were there, but now United States is directly involved in this whole war.
And what could be the potential implications of this military escalation by US?
See, the military potential can be a full-blown war. We have to see and assess the capabilities of Iran. It was claiming that it has only hit till now its 20% missiles. It has a huge barrage of missiles. It has a good arsenal. an arsenal which can penetrate deep into the areas inside Israel. And now it has two enemies, Anjali, not only Israel, but United States also. So now when United States has joined this whole war directly in this bombing operation, now Iran might retaliate back more strongly, because till now we were seeing that there were ballistic missiles that were coming in on the hospitals, on the residential buildings, on the areas that were key areas inside Israel, important locations like Haifa port. So now we have to see that whether Iran takes on this retaliation alone, or some of its allies also choose to join in this war, like United States has joined to support Israel. So this can be a completely game-changing situation where we have to see that in the coming hours, what is the reaction of the allies of Iran, and what action is going to come from Iran towards Israel.
Right, Shivani, also how has Iran responded officially to these US strikes on its nuclear sites?
See, Anjali, there is a confirmation that has come from Iran's side that has confirmed the news of this bombing. They have not told the measure of or the impact of this bombing from the United States, but certainly the confirmation has come that there is some damage to these nuclear sites inside Iran, and the retaliatory remarks that are coming in that say that now United States citizens or the people of the United States inside Iran are their legitimate targets. So this is the confirmation that is coming from Iran, that is now saying that yes, this action has taken place, because in this whole conflict there have been a number of misinformation, propaganda campaigns. Multiple times the claims from all the countries have not been so true, and the intense or the impact of damage, the measure of damage could not be assessed until we ourselves see those pictures. But now that confirmation coming in from President Trump, and then a remark and return reaction coming in from Iran that says yes, there has been a hit on our nuclear sites, that means there is confirmation that these sites inside Iran have been hit by United States, and Iran is preparing for a counter action.
All right.
You're watching Al Jazeera. I'm Rob Matheson with continuing breaking news coverage of U.S. military strikes on Iran. Tehran accuses the U.S. of betraying international diplomacy by attacking 3 nuclear sites in the country.
We were in the middle of talks and negotiation with Europeans. Happened only 2 days ago in Geneva, when this time Americans decided to blow it up.
Overnight, President Trump ordered stealth bombers to strike at the heart of Iran's nuclear program.
Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace.
Hours after the strikes, Iran fired another barrage of missiles against Israel. At least 20 people have been injured. And also in the program, the death toll keeps on rising from Israel's assault on Gaza. Palestinians desperate for aid are being killed. Iran's foreign minister is accusing the U.S. of betraying diplomacy. Abbas Araghchi has made the comments in the past hour following the U.S. military's attack on Iran's 3 big nuclear sites. President Donald Trump ordered the strikes on the Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan plants, saying it was to prevent any nuclear threat from Tehran. Now, these are some of the images in the aftermath of the Fordo attack. The uranium enrichment facility is estimated to be 80 meters underground. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency has called for an emergency board meeting.
We were in the middle of talks with the United States when Israelis blew it up. Of talks go So we were in diplomacy, but we were attacked militarily. So it was not Iran, but the US who betrayed diplomacy. They betrayed negotiations. When at the middle of negotiations with us, they gave green light to Israelis.
Well, we're going to be unpacking the latest developments with our correspondents in Tehran, Amman, and Washington, D.C. First, we're going to go to Sinem Kosioglu in Istanbul. She was at the press conference where Iran's foreign minister has been speaking. I was just reading through some of the notes that have been made after that press conference. Pretty clear where Abbas Araghchi believes the blame for what is going on lies with the U.S., not only the U.S., of course, but with the IAEA as well. Give us a summary of your thoughts about what was going on.
Well, actually, Abbas Araghchi repeated what he has been tweeting and sharing since yesterday as he arrived in Istanbul after his talks with the European diplomats. And he underlined that his country was on the table for negotiations, but he was betrayed by the United States, by the European countries. And he said that they are ready to respond. They will be responding. And according to the Iranian diplomacy tradition, the conventions of the Iranian diplomacy, whether it will be a small response or a big one, no one has any idea, but they sure are planning for an attack. When he was asked another question, he mentioned that he doesn't have the authority to reveal what Iran is going to do next, but his sentence was this: "We will respond." And apparently Iran is upset about what has been going on because they say their nuclear project was peaceful and they weren't aiming for a nuclear weapon, and they have been accusing the International Atomic Agency for not being clear with the United States. If they were clear about saying that they haven't enriched uranium for a nuclear weapon and there was no risk, this wouldn't happen as per the Iranian authorities and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. That's why he's asking for the UN Security Council for an emergency meeting. Iran's UN ambassador wrote a letter to the UN regarding this request early morning on Sunday. And he's also calling on the International Atomic Agency to do its job, to be in line with international law and binding agreements. And when he was asked about whether Iran is planning to withdraw from the non-proliferation treaty, again he said that if Iran is following the rules, but no others are following, then what is the use of those international treaties and organizations? Apparently now they are also calculating the damages of these attacks, recent attacks by the United States overnight, the Israeli attacks so far, and they are planning for their next move, which no one has any idea about yet. Back to you.
Sinem, as I understand it as well, he was also, however, calling for a UN Security Council meeting, an emergency meeting to discuss what's been going on.
Well, yes, this is what they are aiming for, because even at the OIC summit in Istanbul, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation Countries, their foreign ministers have been gathering since yesterday. The aim was to make a call to the UN Security Council to push for further intervention on Israel. But over the night, we saw that the United States attacked the nuclear facilities of Iran, and now this gets more vigilant because the U.S. is the strongest member of the United Nations. But this is what Mr. Araghchi mentioned. He said the U.S. actually violated the United Nations Charter, and they actually cheated on their own voters. This is what he said. We haven't heard about any emergency meeting yet, but probably the UN Security Council is going to respond very quickly, and we will hear. But what the UN Security Council will do is also another question, because on one side you have the strongest member, United States, and Israel, who is a very strong element apparently in the domestic politics of the United States as well. It will be an interesting scene to wait and see.
Sinem, thank you very much indeed. Sinem Kosiola there talking to us from Istanbul. We're going to go to Adi Hashim in the Iranian capital, Tehran. Perhaps not a surprise, the tone that Iran's foreign minister was giving in that statement, clearly condemning the actions of the US, Israel, and also the IAEA.
IAEA.
Well, Rob, for now, what we have is two layers of Iranian response to what happened. So we don't know yet what's the retaliation. What we saw now from Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi in Istanbul, add to that what we heard from the IRGC here in Tehran, is just an ambiguous response to what happened. Both the Foreign Ministry that Mr. Araghchi represents and the IRGC are under the Supreme National Security Council. So when the Supreme National Security Council here in Iran decides what's the retaliation, then we will hear the second part of the answer. And that's why we had Mr. Araghchi saying in his answers that he is not in a position right now to say what they are going to do. And there are several options in front of Iran. The main issue is that when this council convenes and takes the decision, then Mr. Araghchi, the IRGC, who I'm going to read their statement, they issued a statement just a few minutes ago also, saying that Washington has now placed itself on the front line of aggression by directly attacking peaceful installations. They also said that the locations from which the aircraft involved in this aggression took off have been identified and under surveillance. And as they also said that they've repeatedly declared the number on scale of U.S. military bases in the region are not source of strength, rather a major vulnerability. And that in response to the act of aggression, the attacks will continue on Israel, what they call the Operation True Promise 3, will continue with a precise, targeted, and severe manner against the infrastructure, strategic centers, and interests of the Israelis. Furthermore, today's act of aggression by the terrorist U.S. regime, as per the statement, has compelled the Islamic Republic of Iran within its legitimate right to self-defense to consider responses that go beyond the delusional calculations. Now, this is what the IRGC said. Even Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, now, there are several automatic responses that people would have expected. For example, exiting the non-proliferation treaty.
Joining my live or listening to the news today about war.
Non-proliferation situation right now that the United States has put the world in, but he did not touch on this. Also, with respect to closing the Hormuz Strait, which was something we had a lot on TV. Iranian officials been saying that immediately they are going to close this strait. There's no mention of this, neither the foreign minister nor the IRGC, also with respect to the attacks. So what we can just wrap now, and the takeaway of what we heard from Araghchi and the IRGC is that till the moment the position is ambiguous. They're all waiting the National Security Council to agree on the manner of the retaliation, and then we'll start hearing from the Iranians.
Yeah, I'm just reading through the statement that you've been referring to there, Ali, and I understand what you mean about it being somewhat ambiguous and leaving the kind of door open for the IRGC and for Iran generally in terms of its response. I would also imagine that the level and direction of the response is also going to be determined by the level of damage that the nuclear facilities in Iran have sustained. Do we have any indication yet of what kind of damage has been done by the US attacks?
Well, what we have to take into consideration, a major issue here, the sovereignty of Iran has been breached. This alone, according to the Iranian narrative, requires a response. Now, regardless of what's the amount of damage. Now, according to what we've been hearing from Iranian officials, from the Iranian nuclear agency, from the advisor to the parliament, that the amount of damage is not complete. I mean, the idea is that the places, the facilities were not completely destroyed. And also, what we've been hearing from Behruz Kamalvandi, the spokesperson to the Iranian nuclear agency in the past days, he said that Iran has already transported and transferred the enriched uranium stockpile and also a lot of technology from that base. The satellite imagery shows more than 20 trucks moving from the Fordo nuclear facility and outside on the 20th and the 21st of June. Also, the UK-based website Amouage revealed, according to the reporting, that the United States already told Iran in advance that it's going to hit here and there and the timing. So the Iranians had a lot of time, something similar to what happened in Ain al-Assad in 2020 when Iran informed the Americans in advance to their retaliation to the killing of General Soleimani.
Ali Hashem in Tehran there. Ali, thank you very much indeed. We're going to go to Noor Ode. She's joining us from Jordan's capital. She's in Amman because the Israeli government's banned Al Jazeera from reporting inside Israel and the occupied West Bank. So while those attacks were going on by the US in response to that, we've also had Iranian attacks on Israel. What's been happening?
I'm just concerned to the lives
Two
of the
successive
people.
volleys of about 27 missiles came from Iran to Israeli cities, making impact in Haifa and the larger Tel Aviv area, and Rishon LeZion, in Bat Yam, and other neighborhoods. There weren't a lot of casualties reported, despite the extensive damage that we saw to buildings, especially in the Tel Aviv area. 26 Israelis injured, one moderately. We are also hearing about an investigation launched by the Israeli army because a missile made impact in Haifa before the sirens went off. Now, most probably, according to some estimate, that was an interception missile, but we remain, waiting for the outcome of that investigation if it is made public, because again, the Israeli military censor controls the knowledge that we can share with our viewers during these days, because the restrictions are really severe, and the punishment could be imprisonment for journalists who share information not cleared by the censor.
No, what's been the wider reaction waking up to the news that they have been attacked? But of course,
well, the news of the U.S. strike was received with a lot of celebration in Israel. Politically speaking, this was a big win for Benjamin Netanyahu after decades of lobbying for U.S. involvement, for the U.S. taking the lead in attacking Iran, because Israel doesn't have the technical capacity to attack Fordo, for example. He has done it. And so this is something that he really highlighted and focused on in his message in Hebrew. In English, he mostly showered Donald Trump with praise. Some of his ministers even said that Donald Trump was a messenger of God because of what he did. And of course, even the opposition leaders, even people who are on the opposite side of politics from Netanyahu, welcomed the U.S. action and thanked Donald Trump for standing with Israel. The Israeli president as well, thanking Donald Trump and saying that this was a testament to that strategic, unshakable bond between the two countries. Billboards in Tel Aviv have come up thanking Donald Trump for what he did. But of course, when you offset that with the missiles still coming in, with the prospect of even more Iranian retaliation, which we, still uncertain what kind of shape it would take, and the fact that more restrictions have been imposed on ordinary daily tasks in Israel because of that anticipation, then questions might arise, and they are already being put forward by some commentators, not all, although in the larger Jewish Israeli public, there is a lot of support for attacking Iran.
That's Noor Ode in Jordan's capital, Amman. No, thank you very much indeed. Donald Trump's called on Iran to make peace quickly or risk further military action. We're going to be live in Washington, D.C. in a moment. But first, the support from our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett.
Party?
Just days after President Donald Trump said he would decide within 2 weeks whether to strike Iran, the U.S. Commander-in-Chief gave the order to attack.
Thank you very much.
Making the announcement Saturday night from the White House.
Tonight I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
The White House releasing these photos of Trump, his vice president, and top advisors watching the strikes unfold from the Situation Room. Using B-2 bombers, Trump says a payload of 30,000-pound bombs dropped on the Fordo nuclear facility. Tomahawk missiles were reportedly used to destroy the Natanz and Esfahan sites. Prior to the attack, Trump had been pushing Iran to make a deal to give up all nuclear enrichment, so the sovereign nation couldn't build a nuclear weapon. But Trump's 60-day deadline passed, and there was still no agreement. On day 61, Israeli fighter jets took action, hitting Tehran and other cities last week, killing some of Iran's top scientists and military officials. On Saturday, Trump said Israel's fight is also America's fight.
We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel.
Criticism from congressional Democrats was swift. Senator Chris Murphy posting on X, Trump has been goaded into these strikes by the perpetual cheerleader of war in the Middle East. All my thoughts tonight are for the safety of our personnel in the region. The U.S. has reportedly reached out to Iran, indicating the strikes were limited. Regime change isn't planned. The Trump administration hopes Iran will now return to the negotiating table, warning Iran if there's retaliation, there'll be more attacks.
There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left.
The White House has not yet released an assessment of just how much damage was caused by the U.S. strikes on Iran's 3 nuclear sites. That bomb damage assessment is likely to be made public when the Secretary of Defense holds his briefing at the Pentagon on Sunday. Kimberly Halkett, Al Jazeera, the White House.
Television is joining us from Washington, D.C. Alan, I think it's about 6:20 in the morning where you are. Are we getting any sort of indication of the reactions? Obviously, we've had the reactions from congressional members and so on, but the public is waking up to this. And so one would imagine is the White House. What are we hearing?
I mean, obviously, there's no monolith in the United States. You can't say that the American people are acting this way or this way. Certainly, the politicians reflect the broad feeling. On some degree, there is the Republicans who support Donald Trump. They believe he has done the right thing. And on the other side, there are Republicans and Democrats who say that this was a very bad move by the United States. One of the biggest concerns, of course, is the intelligence. It's just March 26th when Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence, who collates all the intelligence coming in to the United States, told Congress that there was no evidence that Iran was working towards a nuclear bomb, that there was no indication that they'd restarted the nuclear bomb program, which was suspended in 2013. Donald Trump, of course, has said that that is wrong, that she is wrong, in a very public rebuke. Tulsi Gabbard tried to claw back some of the ground between her and Donald Trump by reissuing her statement, missing out the key part at the beginning. But it's clear Americans are worried that they could be dragged in to a Middle East war on the basis of faulty intelligence, because it's not that long ago that that happened. And we saw the consequences of that with thousands of people being killed. Now, the United States will be making plans for what happens next. I was speaking to a military expert last night, and he said, look, after an attack like this, the next 48 hours are the most significant and most important. You wait to see what the reaction will be. But he pointed out 2 things. One, Donald Trump claiming complete and a spectacular success. He can't do that. He won't have, at that stage when he made that comment, any indication of just how much damage was inflicted on the Iranian nuclear sites. And the second thing he pointed out is you can make plans, you can decide what you're going to do, but your opponent also has a say, and how they respond will become key to what happens next.
Alan, thank you very much. Alan Fisher there talking to us from Washington, D.C. Hassan Ahmadian is an assistant professor at the University of Tehran. He's joining us from the Iranian capital. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. As Alan was just pointing out, essentially everybody is now watching to see what Iran does next. Do we have any indication of the kind of options that might be lying before it?
Wait, guys.
Well, the Iranians are playing by the book. The foreign minister spoke about a session that needs to be the Security Council. They are, trying to isolate the United States legally, internationally, and provided that, as experience suggests, nothing will really happen there, the Iranians will take action on their own, and this action can take different forms. They already launched an unprecedented attack on Israel as a retaliation for its aggression, but also they ratchet up the attack, I think, as a response also to a U.S. doing Israeli bidding when it comes to attacking Iran's nuclear sites. Moving forward, I mean, the attack seems to be choreographed and given the info before attacking to Iran indicates a U.S. A different approach this time around, and the Iranians will take that into account when responding to the United States. And I think the Iranians have indicated that they have a right to respond. Now, how and when it's really still not clear. I think the Iranians will have to do a reaction because non-action is not an option. For the United States might go even further in its assault on Iran. So far, it has been limited. And the information that were given to Iran gave it time to move out much of its assets there in the sites that were targeted. So it's a bit of a limited assault on Iran, but still, it's violation of international law, violation of IAEA non-proliferation treaty. Iran is a member, the US is a member. They attacked a nuclear peaceful program that Iran that's fully under IAEA inspection. They basically violated each and every law when it comes to the international community. And so the Iranians are banking on that to push back against the US. But at the same time, as I said, they might see it at one point when the international community is not doing much to take things into their hands, moving against American bases or assets around the region in Iran's vicinity.
So we heard Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi talking in the last hour or so, and he was condemning the US, he was condemning Israel, he was also condemning the IAEA. But our correspondent Ali Hashim was pointing out what he did not do was suggest, for example, that Iran would pull out of the non-proliferation treaty. Do you think that is an option that Iran might be considering?
Being in the NPT really doesn't make sense anymore. A non-NPT member that is a nuclear state has attacked Iran's nuclear installation, and the IAEA is so far short of issuing even a statement of condemnation. Now an NPT member, which is also a nuclear power, has attacked Iran's nuclear sites, and no sign of indications of any reaction by the IAEA. So the NPT is not doing anything for Iran to protect and shield its facilities against aggression, which is stark violation of its charter. And I think the Iranians might take that into account. They are thinking about their options. I think there are a variety of options. NPT exiting is one of them for sure. Nuclear ambiguity, which follows after an NPT withdrawal, is another. A retaliation against assets around the region is another. And of course, doubling down on attacking Israel in retaliation for its attacks is another option that the Iranians have already did. So it remains to be seen whether Iran decides to notify the IAEA of its willingness to withdraw from the NPT. But I think that's a very strong option that Iran has, and I think if it gives Iran a leverage that is currently lacking, but that's an option.
Our correspondent Kimberly Halkett, in her report just a moment ago, was saying that the US had reportedly reached out to Iran to report that the strikes they had made were limited and that regime change isn't planned. Is that something that Iran would believe?
When will it finish this war?
Yeah, well, there is no trust in what the United States is saying. They said they were talking with the Iranians, and there were 5 rounds of talks, and one was scheduled, but they were surprisingly attacked by the Israelis, and that opportunity is gone for now. There were talks just 2 days ago with Europeans and the United States this time around, basically done away with that, with those talks. I think whenever the Iranians went for talks, the United States and the Israelis seized each and every opportunity to blow them up. And I think the Iranians have, the trust already was very limited. Nowadays, it's non-existent. And so the talks about Iran getting back to negotiations is basically, it's not relevant to the situation we're in, because Iran was on the table, Iran was negotiating, Iran was in talks with the United States and then with Europe. All were in vain when it comes to the attacks that Iran received after basically reaching out and trying to settle this diplomatically.
Hassan and Marian, good to get your thoughts on this. Thank you very much for being with us on Al Jazeera. You're watching Al Jazeera. If you're just joining us, here's a quick reminder of the latest developments in our breaking news coverage of the Israel-Iran conflict, which the US has now entered. Iran's foreign minister says the US crossed a red line by attacking its 3 main nuclear sites. Sanitation says diplomacy is no longer an option, as the Americans only understand the language of threat and force. The US president says a full payload of bombs was dropped on each Iranian nuclear site. Donald Trump says operations at the Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan plants have been totally obliterated. Iran has retaliated to the US attacks by firing missiles into Israel. They struck northern and central areas, including the cities of Tel Aviv and Haifa. And the Israeli military says at least 27 rockets were fired from Iran in 2 separate waves. At least 27 people have been injured. Rescue workers are searching through damaged buildings in Tel Aviv. Ofer Hassif is a Knesset member. He's also a member of the Hadash movement. He's joining us live from Rehovot in Israel. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Would it be fair to say that Israelis now are somewhat tense and waiting to see what kind of response Iran is going to make longer term to the US attacks?
Yeah, of course, nobody really knows what's going to happen. I personally lament the involvement of the United States, just like I lament the whole situation. This war could have been prevented in the first place, and unfortunately, too many forces were interested, each and one of them for his own interests, and that's what we've got. At the end, as always, the peoples of the region are paying the price. The Iranians, the Israelis, the Palestinians, let's not forget that Gaza is still going on through a terrible genocide and starvation. The Israeli hostages are held there, and nobody really seems to care, given the smokescreen of the Israeli war with Iran. So, but as to the future, nobody really knows what's going to happen. And as I said, I surely hope that this nightmare is going to over soon for everybody who's involved.
We're still obviously waiting to see what kind of reaction Iran is going to provide a longer term with regard to what has been happening in terms of the US attacks. Is there a feeling, do you think, in Israel that people are going to be safer as a result of these US attacks, or do you think that the threats and their origins may simply change?
First of all, I have to emphasize that I am interested in the well-being and safety and security of everybody, of all the peoples, including the Israelis, of course. Now, I'm afraid that now we are going towards the abyss even more than before. You know, it seems that too many people now are in euphoria. But they also were in such an euphoria, you know, in the United States, in Israel, in some other places, after the American invasion of Iraq in 2003. I remember that Netanyahu then said, let's not forget that he was one of those who encouraged George W. Bush to invade and attack Iraq then. And then Netanyahu said that there was going to be, and I quote him, a positive chain reaction. And as we all know, it turned to be a complete nonsense and ended with the rise of ISIS, with a terrible bloodbath in the whole region. So now again, Netanyahu, as well as Trump and some others, are still in euphoria and pride and say more or less the same things, that there's going to be a positive chain reaction, that there's going to be, as Netanyahu said, perhaps even democratization of some regimes. I'm afraid that we are going to face something exactly the opposite, just like happened 20 years ago, although the circumstances are radically different. But still, what kind of reaction are we going to, should we expect? More blood and more destruction? That's what I'm afraid of. I can tell you one thing, if I may, that the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza who continue to be slaughtered and starved are not in euphoria. The Israeli hostages and their families are not in euphoria. The Palestinians in the occupied West Bank who've been assaulted by settlers and the occupation forces on a daily basis are not in euphoria. The people of Iran are not in euphoria, and the Israelis who have no shelter are not in euphoria. And eventually, I'm very, very terrified that we are going towards a very dark days, some very dark days. And I hope not. I hope that peace and justice will prevail, but I'm worried.
Up until recent days, U.S. President Donald Trump had been pushing Iran to get to the negotiating program. That in the last hour or so, that there is always a place for diplomacy, but this isn't the right time for it, and there are always a place for negotiations. This isn't the right time for it. In the longer term, if it was to ever get to the stage where those negotiations could start again, do you think that Israel would allow those to happen?
As we know thus far, the government of Israel, led by Netanyahu, has done whatever possible to undermine any kind of progress in the negotiations. And I believe that this government will do the same if something like that happens. But I'm not very optimistic, I must say, about the chances of new negotiations because, you know, many, again, given the euphoria I mentioned before, many now say, including President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and others, say that now the capabilities of Iran have been diminished. That is probably true. But the question is whether the motivation on the part of Iran has been diminished. And I'm afraid it's exactly the opposite. Because once Iran was attacked by Israel and afterwards by the United States,
matutulog na tayo mamaya.
Both to develop perhaps a nuclear
Bukas
weapon
na.
and not to be engaged in negotiations, that motivation may increase given the violation of the promises and of the progress that could have been made before United States launched its latest attack.
So please forgive me for interrupting you, and I apologize for doing that. I am conscious of the time that we have, but we are very grateful to you for being with us on Al Jazeera. Thank you very much indeed. World leaders are responding to the U.S. attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities. Saudi Arabia says it's following developments with great concern and calls on the international community to step up diplomatic efforts in what it describes as a highly sensitive period. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer supported the U.S. action, saying Iran must never be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. He's urging Tehran to return to the negotiating table and pursue a diplomatic solution. Qatar says it deplores the deterioration and warns an increase in dangerous tension could lead to catastrophic repercussions in the region and internationally. Doha is urging all sides to halt military action and return to dialogue. Oman has previously mediated nuclear talks between the US and Iran, and is calling the US strikes a serious violation of international law and the UN Charter. It condemns the escalation and expresses deep concern for the possible consequences. Adnan Hayeshna is a professor of international relations and U.S. foreign policy at Qatar University. He's joining us live from Jordan's capital, Amman. So thank you very much indeed for being with us. I was just reading out some of the responses that we've had from foreign governments to what's been going on, and of course from Gulf governments as well, who are very close to the scene of what's been going on. What's your assessment of the way the world is responding to this?
It seems to me the world is divided into two sides. One side is headed by Netanyahu and Trump, and they have their own way of doing things in the region, and nobody's taken into consideration the interests of the people of the region and the whole world. A lot of people, and Iran, and now the United States involved. And we know what when the United States get involved, it is only the start. It will be dragged toward maybe lasted for a few years, and maybe a failed states, another failed states in the region. And now we have Israel taken over all the countries in the Arab world, and the Arab world are kind of powerless to respond. How to respond? Israel is killing the Palestinians. More than 50,000 Palestinians were killed. And they want to transfer all the Palestinians into Jordan. Israel, under the leadership of Netanyahu, are taking control of Lebanon, some parts of Lebanon. They're attacking Yemen, they're attacking Syria, they're attacking everybody else. They have a big stick, and they want to control the whole region. And if they cannot do it by themselves, they will have the United States do it or get into their side to help them to do.
Security Council meeting that was being held in New York to discuss the situation between Israel and Iran when Israel was carrying out the majority of the attacks. Russia and China both spoke at that meeting, but their responses were condemnatory of what was going on, but that seems to be as far as it's gone. What do you think is the position of Russia and China in this?
We hear a lot of condemnation by both superpowers, call them great powers, Russia and China, but at the end of the day, they will not confront the United States. They will not the United States be dragged into another war, and it will be useful for them, I think, to do whatever they wish in terms of China and its ambition of being a hegemonic power to balance the United States. This is another opportunity because the United States were interested to concentrate on the rise of China, and Trump thinks that China is the main threat for American hegemony, and Russia will have a range on free hand to do whatever it wishes in Ukraine. And we have the promises coming from Trump that he will solve all the problems of the world and see what we get, another war in the Middle East.
Obviously, a lot of attention being paid on the way in which Iran is expected or has been going on. What are your greatest concerns in that?
Well, I find in the region, namely the military bases of the states, because this is well emphasize and support the theme of Israel and the United States that Iran is a threat to the region. I think they may be using the United Nations Charter of Self-Defense, and they are defending themselves. They were open to negotiation. They were open to diplomatic negotiation regarding the Iranian nuclear program, but Israel took a preventive measures, as would say, and now everybody's involved in that war. I am not sure what will happen next.
Adnan Khayeshnet, we appreciate it, sir. Thank you very much indeed for being with us on Al Jazeera. I want to go to Scott Lucas. He's a professor of US and international politics at University College Dublin. He's joining us live now from Wicklow in Ireland. Good to have you with us. Up until very recently, as we were just talking about, Donald Trump was trying very hard to get Iran back to the negotiating table for its nuclear talks. All of a sudden, there seems to be this diversion, and the US is carrying out attacks in Iran. Why do you think he did that?
Because Donald Trump got played by the Israelis. Some might say manipulated. You're absolutely right that we had these 5 sets of U.S.-Iran talks with the 6th scheduled for Oman last Sunday. But in mid-May, the Israelis, whose Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had been embarrassed in February when Trump said he was going to pursue the diplomatic path, the Israelis let the Trump administration know, look, we're going ahead with the attacks. The Trump administration discussed this for a few weeks, and then on June 8th, so just a couple of weeks ago, they made the decision that if Israel was going to have to go in, they were going to actually support the attacks. So there was that first phase, right? And so over the course of the next 9 days, as Israel has hit not just nuclear sites, but military sites and civilian sites, the Trump administration has effectively buried negotiations and supported the Israelis, whatever Trump says about being a peacemaker. Because what the Israelis told the Trump administration is, look, you can still get your deal. You can still get that big photo opportunity in the deal with the Iranians, but they're more likely to negotiate with you if we have punished them. In other words, almost force them to surrender. And that's what Donald Trump keeps tweeting and tweeting and tweeting. The problem is, of course, is that the Iranians were not surrendering. So you got to the point this week where you had some advisors to Trump saying, you've got to go in, you've got to hit the nuclear sites. You had others who opposed it. Trump went wobbly just a few days ago. Remember the 2-week window? But then people who favored the attack got into his ear. He decided to approve it, and that's where we are now.
So we were hearing from our correspondents in the US about the split that appears to be happening amongst Donald Trump's supporters, those who were all in favor of this kind of attack, those who were dead against it and have been from the start. How much of a gamble is this for Donald Trump?
Yeah, there were 2 gambles for Trump, which is why just a few days ago he started to back off from the attacks. The first gamble, which we await the result of, is whether or not the bunker busters would be effective in reaching the Fordo underground facility and would really cause damage. But the second was the domestic situation, where you have more traditional but hard right Republicans who have long campaigned for attacks on Iran. I'm thinking all the way back to John Bolton 20 years ago, and now you have people like Senator Ted Cruz. And then you have Trumpists like the polemicist Tucker Carlson or the former advisor Steve Bannon, who believe that the only U.S. intervention, the only U.S. military intervention that's justified is against China because of that great rivalry that they have. And Carlson in particular, who's also close to the Kremlin, has been arguing, don't hit Iran, don't go in against Iran. I think if this is a one-off strike, in other words, if it's limited to just this episode, then Trump gets away from the domestic problems of the split amongst his base. But if Fordo has not been damaged, if other nuclear sites continue to operate, then I think the Americans may have to go back in again, and Trump is going to have that risk that it is going to alienate some of his supporters.
We've been hearing from many congressional Democrats in the U.S. who've been certainly on social media, saying that Donald Trump should have talked to Congress before carrying out this attack. I wonder if you could just clarify that for us. Is he actually obliged to do that if this is a single attack, or does he have to do that only if the attack becomes a protracted one?
Mm-hmm.
This goes back to legislation that was passed because of the Vietnam conflict. The U.S. never formally declared war over Vietnam, and Congress said in the mid-'70s, look, you can't just have an open-ended intervention. You have to come to us for authority. But the fact is that administrations ever since then have continued to avoid going to Congress. Ronald Reagan did so, for example, when you had the attacks on Panama or on Grenada, and indeed when you had the attack on Iraq, in 2003. You never had that formal authority specifically of saying we're going to war. It was done under another piece of legislation, the war on terror. So what happens here is that the Trump administration cites a specific threat, which is of Iran's nuclear weapon that it supposedly is constructing, and say this was an imminent threat that we had to deal with, and thus they avoid having to get that declaration of war from Congress.
Scott Lucas is Professor of US and International Politics at University College Dublin, and as always, we're grateful to have you on Al Jazeera. So thank you very much indeed.
Outside.
At least 6 people have been killed in Israeli attacks in Gaza overnight during an internet blackout that lasted 5 hours. Among them was a married couple who died when their apartment to the north of Nuseirat was hit. At least 3 people were also killed in attacks on displaced people living in tents to the west of Khan Yunis. Hani was joining us live from Gaza City. At the moment, of course, the world's attention on Israel and Iran and the US, but the attacks continue by Israel in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Rob, and just before going into the details of what happened in the past few hours, just let me bring our viewers' attention to that at this moment there are many of the drones that are hovering in the skies of the Gaza. We could clearly hear the buzz sound of these drones. There are in fact more than one in the skies over Gaza City and the northern territories, and that's unfortunately it's a bad omen. Once we see more than one drone, it means there is an expected attack to happen, and we don't know yet when is this going to happen or where is it going to happen, but it's been hovering for the past at least hour and 30 minutes around the area. Also, that was coupled or still coupled with many of the heavy explosion coming from the eastern part of Gaza City, Shujaiya, Zaytun, and the Tufah neighborhood. These are the eastern part of Gaza City. Once densely populated neighborhoods turn now into vast field of rubble due to the ongoing demolition of homes in the eastern area. Many of these homes, the clusters have been destroyed and flattened to the ground. But at earlier hours from the morning, attacks on tents housing displaced Palestinians in the city of Khan Yunis, followed by another attack in a residential apartment where a husband and his wife were killed, including one more in the eastern part of Khan Yunis city. There's also reports of many of the critically injured individuals as they were waiting near distribution sites in the eastern part of the city of Khan Yunis. They were shot at by the quadcopters and by the armored vehicles and the tank station in the areas of Khan Yunis. It's a passage to many of the 80 trucks coming off the crossings into the southern part of the strip, and this is not the first time we're seeing this area being relentlessly attacked, or a crowd of people being attacked and shot at by the Israeli tanks in the area. That is happening while the global attention has shifted to what's going on and the rising escalation between Tehran and Tel Aviv. And again, the expectation was this was going to bring at least a calm into the area, but unfortunately this is not happening. The genocidal acts continue to unfold. The humanitarian situations continue to get more challenging. We're talking about many of the humanitarian aid that were supposed to come in, even through the GHF, haven't been able to come into the people, even though it's a trickle amount. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has shut down operations for the past few days, citing security and logistics reasons behind the decision, leaving thousands of people hungry without a proper access to food, while at the same time, the Israeli military preventing organizations like Honor One, other organizations operating on the ground from delivering much needed aid. And that's, of course, affecting not just people on day-to-day life, but also critical facilities like hospitals. The Shifa hospital here in the Gaza Strip is overcrowded, is struggling very much to accommodate the injuries, struggle to provide much needed medical care, and that repeats itself over and over across the Strip in hospitals like Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis and Al-Aqsa Hospital in Deir al-Balah city.
Hani, I understand what you're saying about the drones hovering overhead that usually come before an Israeli attack. I just want to say that if you and the team need to get to safety, or wherever safety you can get to, then you just go ahead and do it. But in the meantime, can you just tell me about the kind of conditions that people are having to live in at the moment? Because we're not just talking about the lack of delivery of aid, are we? We're talking about the lack of sanitation, the lack of water supplies as well.
Absolutely, and this is another daily struggle for people. Not only that water has been quite limited and very scarce in areas where water is much needed. In displacement sites, people are going through much of the difficulties on their daily life. The water for just washing is not available, let alone for human consumption. It's not safe enough because it's mostly contaminated. But the lack of sanitation and hygiene and other critical facilities are causing many of the problems. Let's not forget we are just entering summertime, and it's getting hot, it's humid, and it's the lack of water and sanitation just creating this favorite conditions and favorite environment for the spread of infectious diseases. Living in a tent in summertime is not a pretty thing. This is not a one-night activity in the wilderness. People have been staying in these tents for over 20 months now, just enduring many of the difficulties and the terrible, difficult condition. Whether it's winter time, they had to endure the cold of the winter and the rain and the floods, and now summertime, the heat, the spread of mosquitoes and flies that are creating much of the favorite conditions for the spread of disease, particularly skin disease that has started to spread here. Many of the cases have been already documented inside the hospitals. And of course, all of this, the lack of water, sanitation, and hygiene, is adding much more pressure on the hospital, because while hospitals are trying to provide medical care to the injured ones, now they have to give their attention to the other byproducts of this genocide. Many of these diseases needs immediate medical attention. Without it, it's going to only exacerbate and create much more challenging life for a population already traumatized, displaced, and maimed for 20 months.
Hani, thank you very much indeed. Hani Mahmoud, they're talking to us from there, from Gaza City. You're watching Al Jazeera. Reminder of the latest developments in our breaking news coverage of the Israel-Iran conflict, which the US has now entered. Iran's foreign minister says the US has crossed a red line by attacking its three main nuclear sites. Abbas Araghchi says diplomacy is no longer an option, as the Americans only understand the language of threat and force. The US president says a full payload of bombs was dropped on each Iranian nuclear site. Donald Trump says operations at the Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan plants have been totally obliterated. Iran has retaliated to the US attacks by firing missiles into Israel. This struck northern and central areas, including the cities of Tel Aviv and Haifa. Catches Lopez Othien has more on the latest developments.
Iranian strikes began within hours of the U.S. joining the conflict. The damage is extensive, with sites in and around Haifa and Tel Aviv being bombed.
We were in the center of Israel, central division of Israel. A missile fire hit right inside of a building complex behind me.
Iran says it also targeted Israel's main airport, Ben Gurion.
Ben Gurion Airport, the regime's biological research center and alternative command and control centers, were hit during this wave by guided missiles equipped with maneuverable warheads. These were guided until the moment of impact and carried various types of high explosive destructive payloads.
As sirens blare, thousands of Israelis head to underground shelters like this one in Tel Aviv.
And I was really happy that Trump has decided to act. Finally, I think it will end the war. This is my hope. Maybe it is wishful thinking, but I hope it will be fine.
Above ground, the damage is clear. This neighborhood in central Israel, one of several hit. Bolstered by support from the Trump administration, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has previously declared against Iran for as long as it takes. Now, across the Middle East, many are questioning if U.S. strikes will mark the beginning of an end to the conflict or lead to an escalation and a broader regional conflict. Katia Lopez-Odoyan, Al Jazeera.
Earlier, my colleague Sana Khairan spoke to Mehan Kamrallah, a professor of government at Georgetown University in Qatar. He says Iran is preparing for a war of attrition.
Civilians on all sides are suffering, and they're suffering a great deal. I think all eyes are now on Iran to see how Iran will respond. Up until now, we've been waiting for the United States to see if the Americans would respond. But now we're looking at Iran, and of course the Iranian Revolutionary Guards has just announced that now the war has started. So Iran appears to be digging its heels in and is readying itself for a prolonged war of attrition.
One of our analysts was earlier saying that so far what we've seen with Iran is sort of tit for tat, really more a reaction to what Israel has been doing. Are we likely to see a change, a shift in the way Iran is going to be operating moving forward?
I don't think so. I think your analyst was correct. What we've seen is Iran's proportionate response. I don't think Iran, or the United States for that matter, wants to see an escalation of this conflict. The only one who wants to see this conflict expand in scope and extent is Netanyahu. But no, I think Iran wants to see this conflict be contained as much as possible. But of course, they would have to respond to the latest American attack.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, I'm Malin Saeed. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha with our continuing coverage of the U.S. strikes on Iran. Tehran accuses the U.S. of betraying international diplomacy by attacking 3 nuclear sites in the country.
We were in the middle of talks and negotiation with Europeans. Happened only 2 days ago in Geneva, when this time Americans decided to blow it up.
Overnight, President Trump ordered stealth bombers to strike at the heart of Iran's nuclear program.
The French Foreign Minister, Jean-Noël Barrot, he says France has taken note with concern of the strikes carried out by the US. So France is concerned. Then you listen to Johann Wadephor, who's the German Foreign Minister, and he seems to say he's not concerned. He seems to suggest that it was justified. He said preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons is legitimate. And Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, the US has taken action to alleviate the Iranian nuclear threat. So even among this European grouping, the emphasis is in different places. And I think they may, in some ways, be happy with what the US has done, but not happy about the legal underpinnings of all of this. Because if you have a situation in the world where anyone takes action because they feel it's the right thing to do, but it's not justified by international law and the UN Charter, then you have a situation where eventually you turn to the law of the jungle.
Indeed. Okay, James, for the moment, many thanks indeed for joining us there from The Hague.
Well, Gulf leaders are watching the situation particularly closely and are calling for an end to military action in the region. Saudi Arabia says it's following developments with great concern and calls on the international community to step up diplomatic efforts in what it describes as a highly sensitive period. Qatar says it regrets the deterioration and warns an increase in dangerous tension could lead to catastrophic repercussions in the region and internationally. Doha is urging all sides to halt military action and return to dialogue. Oman has previously mediated nuclear talks between the US and Iran and calls the US strikes a serious violation of international law and the UN Charter. It condemns the escalation and expresses deep concern for the possible consequences. Simon Mabon is a professor of Middle East and international politics at Lancaster University. He joins us now from Lancaster. It's great to have you with us. First of all, did you expect the US to launch those attacks?
Well, I'll be honest, I was half expecting something like this, but I was also hoping to take President Donald Trump at his word that he would give Iran 2 weeks to negotiate. But as we've seen with the first round of negotiations of late, which has ended with the Israeli strikes just over a week ago, and now the US strikes, it's really difficult to see any way of trusting Donald Trump and, by extension, trusting the US's role in global diplomacy. So, in short, yes and no, because of Donald Trump himself, his bombastic approach to foreign policy, but also hoping that there would be some type of diplomatic breakthrough is perhaps naive on my part, but I was hopeful. I was hopeful that some way could have been found to avoid this.
And are you saying that you're now not hopeful that the US has just obliterated all trust that Iran might have had in exploring talks with the US?
Well, I think we've seen from Iran that it is willing to engage diplomatically. At least it is willing to sit down and participate in talks. We've seen that in the talks in Oman, the talks in Italy, and the talks recently with European leaders. But what we've not seen is any real good faith from the United States here. In fact, we've seen the exact opposite, as your previous guest was suggesting. This appears to be using diplomacy as a ruse to buy time in order to facilitate this strike. And if we look at the US's own intelligence reports, there was a report from March 2025 from the Office of the National Director of National Intelligence, which explicitly says, and I'm quoting, "We continue to assess Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and that Khamenei has not reauthorized the nuclear weapons program he suspended in 2003. So if that's the case, the US is going against international law, it's going against the norms of diplomacy, which are to operate largely in good faith, and it's going against its own intelligence. So if that's the case, how can anyone trust the United States at present?
And what I found particularly extraordinary about that situation was how quickly Tulsi Gabbard, who of course is the director of national intelligence there, who made those comments, made the U-turn and said, no, the media quoted me out of context, and now I agree that, yes, Iran may get a nuclear weapon within weeks.
Well, I think there we're seeing politics playing at the highest level here. We've seen that Tulsi Gabbard has made these comments extensively in hearings. It's written down in various intelligence assessments. She's had access to 18 different agencies in compiling her analysis of the situation. And so I think it's highly unlikely that she would be perhaps going against the US administration position unless it was a political decision. And that choice to backpedal, if you will, and to follow Donald Trump smacks of political opportunism and being told that she has to fall in line or else.
How much of the US decision was based on Israel, was based on Netanyahu getting into Trump's ear and persuading him to get involved?
Well, that's something I guess we're never going to know. There's a lot of this that we will never know. We don't fully understand the dynamics of much of what's happened, be it in terms of what's happened in Iran, what's happening in the back-channel dialogue between the US and Israel, or indeed the US and Iran for that matter. So we don't know the inner workings, the inner machinations of that personal relationship. And I think it is a deeply personal relationship between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump. We don't know where the power dynamic lies. A lot of people assume that Donald Trump would be able to exert influence and power over Benjamin Netanyahu. But if we look at what's happening, we look at Trump's own rhetoric of wanting to, during his election campaign, articulating a desire to end war, and articulating a desire to withdraw America from the world stage. Well, his actions point to the exact opposite. So perhaps the power dynamic isn't what many had initially assumed, that it would be Trump pulling the strings. Perhaps there is something that suggests that Benjamin Netanyahu is the one that holds the sway over Donald Trump. But again, this is pure speculation. We just don't know.
Yeah, it's very interesting indeed to explore it. Simon Mabon, many thanks indeed for taking the time to join us from Leicester.
Thank you.
Lancaster. Now, Meron Rappaport is an editor and writer at Local Call, an Israeli news site. He joins us now from Tel Aviv. I just want to get your thoughts, Meron, on where you think the power dynamic lies between Netanyahu and Trump, picking off what Simon was saying there.
I think, as my predecessor said, I think it's very hard to know. But it does seem that Netanyahu has a lot of power over Trump. It does seem that he understood, first of all, that Iran is something that is widely accepted, and that Trump could not really resist attacking Iran, that is portrayed for so many years, for decades, as the source of evil internationally. So he knew that it will be quite easy to get Trump on board. And secondly, I think Trump is a person that likes winners, and when he saw that the Israel campaign operation was successful, he joined in. Remember the first comment by Secretary of State Rubio saying that this was a unilateral Israeli attack, the United States had nothing to do with it, and the fact that Trump changed may suggest that he just wanted to join the win.
Do you think Israel is still seeking regime change in Iran? And what is the appetite, do you think, within Israel for the US to keep supporting it?
It's quite contradictory, I think. Now, in these hours, we hear from Israeli sources saying that we are more or less over, that from our point of view, we have achieved our goal, meaning the destruction of the nuclear facilities in Iran, and we can go on and finish this war. But then that will mean that the Iranian regime will stay and maybe even will be relieved of some sanctions, and that will come as not a pleasant gift, I would say, for the Israeli public, who really expected that this regime will be over, because if this regime, as was said to the Israelis for many years, present in itself per se an existential threat to Israel, then if you will get nuclear weapons in 5 years, then we will be in the same position. So I think it's quite contradictory. Israel does not want an attrition war, is very reluctant to do it, but at the same time going out without any real pressure on the Iranian, and admitting that the Iranian will admit that they will not develop a nuclear program and not develop ballistic missiles, it will be a hard sell for the Israelis.
Because to what extent are the Israelis getting weary of another night of being in and out of bomb shelters and coming under attack?
I think that's the worst scenario for Israel, is an attrition war. Attrition war is, I think, maybe the only way in which Iran may Israel.
Okay, Marion Rappaport, great to get your views there from Tel Aviv. Many thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, Syria's state news agency says a suicide bomb attack has targeted a church in the capital, Damascus. At least 13 people have been killed and dozens more injured as a result of the blast that hit St. Elias Church. Ambulances and emergency staff have been dispatched to the site of the explosion. Journalist Abdullah Al-Ukaili joins us now on the phone from Damascus. So, Abdullah, first of all, just tell us what the situation is there.
Hello, Laura. I'm right now at the location of Marias Church in Duela, in Damascus. And the situation here is quite hectic and tense, as you can imagine. There are many ambulances and security forces are surrounding the perimeter, trying to sweep and make sure that no more attacks might take place or something. Additionally, we do know now that the toll has risen. So we know now that according to the Ministry of Health, we have 20 casualties and 52 injuries. That would indicate that one of the injured people has passed away, unfortunately. And this is a developing situation. It's still fluid, and we're still monitoring what is going on.
Okay, many thanks indeed for that update, Abdullah Al-Ukaili. Thanks for joining us there from Damascus. The update on the bomb attack on a church there. Still ahead here on Al Jazeera, we take a look at the world's most powerful non-nuclear bomb used for the first time during the US attack on Iran's nuclear sites.
Hello, weather's looking pretty hot and dusty across the Middle East. No great surprises here. Very little cloud showing up on the satellite picture. Chance of one or two showers over towards the Caucasus. But further south, you can see where we have got the wind starting to pick up across that eastern side of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, a little bit of lifted dust and sand. The wind's probably a little more lively as we go through Tuesday as that shamal kicks in once again. But as I said, largely hot and certainly dry, and also pretty dusty. Largely dry too across the eastern side of the Mediterranean. You might just catch the odd rogue shower just cropping up, but I think it's looking pretty settled here as we go through the next couple of days. And it's a similar picture too across North Africa. Nothing too much to speak of in terms of any wet weather. Possibility of the odd shower just cropping up around northern Morocco over the next day or so, but plenty of dry weather. Plenty of heat, not bad or bad at around 24 Celsius. Showers, easterly waves, starting to pulse some showers across West Africa, over towards Liberia, towards Sierra Leone, towards Guinea. Heaviest rain will be around the Gulf of Guinea, pushing over towards the Rift Valley. On the other side of the Rift Valley, one or two showers into Tanzania, coastal Tanzania and Kenya. But south of that, it's largely dry and hot.
Inspired by 1001 fairy tales, lovingly forged by our craftsmen, embrace the beauty of traditional arts. Amongst ancient treasures, all made with techniques our ancestors perfected centuries ago. Fall in love with Uzbekistan and enjoy every moment. Uzbekistan, crossroads of civilizations.
Examining the headlines.
The intent of this is to be a facade of humanitarianism to enable a genocide.
Unflinching journalism.
Is there anything in America that's not for sale right now?
Sharing personal stories with a global audience.
We contribute the least to the causes of climate change, and yet we are at the forefront.
Explore an abundance of world-class programming on Al Jazeera.
Hello again, you're watching Al
Jazeera. Here's a reminder of our top developments this hour. Iran says time for diplomacy has passed and accuses the US of blowing up diplomacy by attacking 3 of its major nuclear sites. Iran has fired a barrage of missiles at Israel following that US attack. US President Donald Trump's top military officials say Iran's nuclear sites are severely damaged, but insist the US is not at war with Iran or its people. And Israel continues its attacks across Iran. The Israeli military says it's conducted strikes on several cities, including the port city of Bushehr, and for the first time, the central province of Yazd. Well, the eyes of the world have shifted to Israel's conflict with Iran, but the people in Gaza are still being killed. Attacks at aid distribution sites have not stopped, and hospitals are still struggling to keep up with the sheer number of casualties. Ali Mahmoud reports from Gaza City.
As tension between Israel and Iran dominate headlines across the region, the people of Gaza continue to pay the highest price. Not from missiles in the Gulf, but from bullets and bombs here at home. Over the past 72 hours, airstrikes and drone attacks across central and southern Gaza have surged. In residential blocks in Khan Yunis, Deir al-Balah and al-Zahra have been reduced to rubble, with dozens killed and hundreds displaced once again. Civil defense teams are overwhelmed and hospitals, already crippled by siege conditions, are operating far beyond capacity. On Sunday, Israeli forces opened fire near a food distribution site in Rafah. At least 6 Palestinians were killed while waiting for flour and clean water. On a separate attack, an airstrike on a residential home killed a man, his wife, and his 2 daughters. Other family members were left in confirmed a wave of home demolitions of residential clusters in the eastern Gaza Strip. Home by home, block by block, the destruction continues, with no regard for the civilians who once called these places home. Meanwhile, hospitals across the Gaza Strip continue to be overwhelmed, with injured people arriving around the clock. Medical staff say the injuries are consistent with drone shrapnels and sniper fire.
Where are you right
and many
now,
victims
guys?
bled to death before
There's a
help
war
could reach
all
them.
over the world.
As the region inches closer to a
The
wider
problem
war,
is
Gaza is
about
already
the
living
conflict
one, under siege,
on
under
Israel
threat,
and
and now
Iran.
more invisible
We
than
don't know
ever.
what
The
happened to
bombs
this
do not
world
pause
today.
because the headlines shift. And here, hope is as scarce as
I
bread.
hope it will stop
Ali
soon.
Mahmoud, Al Jazeera from Gaza City, Palestine.
Let's get more on the situation now in Iran, where the UN Security Council is meeting in the coming hours to discuss the crisis. China, Russia, and Pakistan want to vote on a draft resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire. Well, let's head to the United Nations headquarters in New York. There we can speak to our correspondent, Gabriel Elizondo. So Iran, Gabe, has called for this emergency UNSC meeting. What should we expect from it?
Liberia. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. This meeting will be taking place in a little under a half an hour from now. Let me just run through who we expect to be the speakers are. The Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, will start the meeting with some remarks. Iran's foreign minister said that he is expecting and hoping that the Secretary General will strongly condemn the U.S. attack on Iran, but the Secretary General will start the meeting. After that, we will hear from Mirsava Zhenka, Assistant Secretary General, Department of Peacebuilding Affairs, and then from Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the IAEA. So we'll be watching what the Secretary General has to say very closely, as well as Mr. Grossi, see if he has any update on any of the damage to the nuclear facilities in Iran after the U.S. strikes. We expect all 15 members of the Security Council to speak, including 2 members that are not part of the Security Council. That would be Iran and Israel. Both will speak towards the end of the meeting. So be watching this very closely to check particularly closely on what Iran and Russia have to say, but clearly a very important meeting. This will be the 3rd emergency meeting by the Security Council since June 13th, when Israel launched its unprovoked attack on Iran about 10 days ago.
And tell us a little bit more, as far as we know, about the draft resolution that's being circulated in the Council.
Yeah, it's important to point out first and foremost that this draft resolution will not be voted on in this meeting in the Security Council. This is just a draft, so it still needs to circulate among Security Council members before it goes up for a vote. Probably at the earliest would be early to middle of next week. This draft resolution by Russia, China, and Pakistan, it's short, it's only a page and a half long, but it has two key points in it. Number one, it condemns in the strongest terms the attacks against the peaceful nuclear sites and facilities safeguarded by the IAEA in Iran. That's number one. It says it's a grave threat to international peace and security and constitutes a serious threat to the entire safeguards of the regime of the IAEA. It does not specifically name the United States. It also calls for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. Again, these are the main points in this draft resolution that has been circulated amongst Security Council members. But the fact that it calls for an immediate ceasefire, we have to remember the United States is one of the P5 permanent members of the Council. So if this ultimately goes to a vote, the U.S. could very well veto it, but we're not there yet. Again, still needs to circulate with the Security Council members that will offer suggested changes to it. Again, potentially to go to a vote by the Security Council, probably early to middle of next week at the earliest.
Okay. Gabriel Zondo, many thanks indeed for joining us there from the UN. Let's bring in Marwan Bashar. He's our senior political analyst, joins us from Paris. So Marwan, let's take a little bit of a step back here for the moment. What have these strikes by the US actually achieved? I mean, will they force Iran back to the negotiating table with the US?
Well, seemingly not. You can say all you want about the Iranians, but they're certainly
I'm from the Philippines.
a proud people. And the regime has shown, although it could be making compromises throughout, say the last 30 years with Khamenei, but it's still a very proud regime, very proud country, very proud people. The idea that it could be humiliated into negotiations, I think it's unlikely. They think in terms of this whole idea of enriching uranium or not, making a deal quickly or not, 60 days, all of that, it's not the question itself. For them, each and everything falls back to the issue, do we or do we not have sovereignty? We are a 3,000-year nation. We're not going to have some guy from Queens, New York, tell us what to do and how to do it.
There's also the issue, as we've been hearing from people throughout this program, that there is very little, if any, trust left for the US now.
Mm-hmm.
See, this is the thing, Laura, right? Since you're taking a step back, let me take, more than a few steps back, just quickly to recap. What is it that we're actually witnessing? As you said, they probably set back the program, I don't know, months, maybe years, right? At best years. We don't know what they've done to the enriched uranium, how far the sites are damaged, and so on. But what we know for a fact is that the United States now is in the, is in the box as far as it's being accused of violating international law, violating the IAEA treaty. It's really irresponsible. It's backstabber twice, not once, twice. It can't be trusted. But worse than all of that, the idea that it could take such an action when there was room for diplomacy tells us what we've been told about the decline and fall of all empires. It is really embodies what Trump has been doing. Divisions at home, hubris abroad, and complacency in between.
And Marwan, it's another issue that has been touched upon this past hour is who actually holds the power in the relationship between Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, and US President Donald Trump. Who's calling the shots here?
These relationships are dynamic. They're changing. They are kind of complex, and they do depend on a number of factors. I could say the same thing, by the way, on everyone from Nixon to Carter to Reagan to Bush to Clinton and so on.
I've studied them all, studied their relationship with Israel, and I can tell you it's a dynamic, changing relationship, whereby there are few basic principles. One, it's Israel that's dependent on the United States. Totally dependent on the United States. And because it's dependent, it tends to be more active. It tends to be more proactive. It tends to be more aggressive. It tends to be more needy. It tends to be, crying out than the Americans. The Americans have the whole world. Israel has its little territory and the Middle East. So because of the dependency is so high on the United States allows Israel to get away with so many things. And we've seen that with a good number of presidents. Look at Biden. Biden was humiliated year after year by Netanyahu, year after year. That my profile of Biden was, the masochist in chief. Why would you, as the president of the United States, allow yourself to be humiliated? Mm-hmm. And by the same breath, it was Netanyahu who said, not knowing that he was being recorded, that, America is just an easy thing. We can always just kind of switch around and change about us also. So there's that kind of balance. Between Netanyahu and Trump, I think Trump always tried to show him who's the boss. But that does not mean he's not following in his footsteps. It's just Trump being, egotistical and alpha male, as they like to say in the United States. So he likes to look like he's the one who's leading. He's the one to be thanked by Netanyahu. But it seems like it's Netanyahu that's manipulating him.
And just lastly, Marwan, to what extent do you think we might see Israel wanting to extend this conflict, if for no other reason other than it's providing a useful smokescreen to cover up its atrocities which are ongoing in Gaza?
Mm-hmm.
You wonder, because there's absolutely no reason why it is continuing with the killing of dozens of people, bombing, starving, mourning families in Gaza. It's just prolonging these wars for no apparent reason. And I think it might be doing the same thing in Iran. They keep talking about days, and now they talk about a couple of weeks. Maybe now they think it's they're allowed to do more because they need a way to climb down the tree. They need a way to climb down the tree because certainly their declared objective, presumably were accomplished. The nuclear sites were bombed, right? And now what? If the objective is regime change, well, essentially they're going to stay engaged. And that means war of attrition. And that means the United States could not get involved, apparently, alongside of them, because as the Secretary of Defense said, it's not an open-ended war, and we don't want regime change.
Yes. Marwan Bashara,
Hello, Manui.
Joining us for Paris.
Before joining my wife or listening to this news, what will happen to our world?
Let's take a closer look now at the weapons used to end the US attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities. Our defense editor, Alex Katopoulos, explains.
Several B-2 stealth bombers flew over 13,000 kilometers from the base in Missouri in the United States, being refueled in the air before dropping the GBU-57, known as the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, or MOP, on targets in Iran. The heaviest conventional weapon in the US arsenal, it weighs in at 13,600 kilos and is designed to destroy underground hardened bunkers and facilities, piercing up to 60 meters of concrete and rock before exploding. Most of the weapon is hardened casing, the MOP punching to the required depth before detonating its 2,400 kilo warhead, with the idea that the facility is destroyed. Only the B-2 stealth bomber can carry them, and even then it can only carry 2. All but invisible to radar, the plane is designed to fly anywhere in the world, penetrate enemy airspace undetected, and drop its payload, all in a matter of hours.
Well, former Israeli diplomat Alon Ben says any expansion of the conflict depends on Iran's response.
It's obviously not an escalation because it follows the pattern of the last 10 days. The only outstanding event was the U.S. attack. So in terms of the Israeli-Iranian tit-for-tat or exchange of salvos, there was no escalation.
I'm listening to
as for the retaliation, you have to assume that it was a retaliatory strike for the American attack. But then again, I go back to the previous point. You need not necessarily have the American attack for the Iranians to respond to Israeli attacks yesterday. So in that respect, it's neither escalatory, indirect retaliation. Israel doesn't know how Iran will retaliate, how Iran will respond, the scale and the scope of any Iranian action against either U.S. forces or the Straits of Hormuz or the Arab Gulf countries. Any of those targets is plausible. If that happens, that of course will be entailed by an American response. And before you know it, we have a major expansion of the war. So Israel is now looking to see and examine two things: whether or not the Iranians directly respond to America, thus dragging the U.S. into a retaliatory strike, and then we're into a cycle of escalation, or not. That's one thing. And the second thing is whether or not in the next few days you're going to hear rhetoric in Jerusalem. Well, you're already hearing that in Jerusalem, but also in Washington, about regime change.
Well, on the diplomatic front, Iran's foreign minister is headed to Russia. He says he'll have talks with President Vladimir Putin on Monday. Yulia Shapovalova has more from Moscow.
The Kremlin has confirmed the meeting with the Iranian foreign minister on Monday. Meanwhile, some analysts say it's highly likely that Iran will offer Trump a compromise and wants Putin to get involved as a mediator. The Kremlin has not yet officially commented on the U.S. night strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, but the Russian foreign ministry has strongly condemned them. President Putin earlier said that Russia would not get involved in the conflict militarily, as Russia conducted its own military operation in Ukraine. Plus, according to President Putin, this conflict doesn't have a military solution at all. But despite Russia has been supporting Iran for many, many years, and in this conflict as well, since the beginning of this round of hostilities, Russia's rhetoric has been very cautious about Israel too, as more than 1.5 million Russian-speaking people from the former Soviet Union and Russia live in Israel today. So President Vladimir Putin even called Israel an almost Russian-speaking country. Meanwhile, Russia's ex-president and current Security Council Deputy Chairman Dmitry Medvedev has posted his assessment of what the Americans achieved with their night strikes on the nuclear facilities in Iran. Not much, according to Medvedev. He wrote that Trump, who came as a peacemaker president, started a new round of war for the United States with the prospect of a possible ground operation. According to him, the critical infrastructure of the nuclear facilities apparently was not heavily damaged, meaning that the enrichment of nuclear materials will continue, and so will the future production of nuclear weapons. Also, the Iranian people are consolidating around their leadership, even those people who did not particularly like this leadership and this Iranian regime, as the US calls them. And also, the majority of countries in the world are against the actions of Israel and the United States, and the consequences of the US strikes, including radiological ones, have yet to be assessed. And head of Russian Nuclear Energy Corporation, Rosatom, Alexei Lihaklov, has said that the US didn't strike the Bushehr nuclear power plant, and the situation there is under control. But if there is any threat to Russian personnel working there, Russia is ready for immediate evacuation of its citizens from there. And earlier, Vladimir Putin raised the issue of Russia's personnel safety at the Bushehr power plant with Prime Minister Netanyahu and Donald Trump. And despite the hostilities, the Russian employees continue working at the plant.
Well, the Iranian government says it's drafting legislation to withdraw the country from the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons as the escalating conflict continues. The NPT, as the treaty is known, came into force in 1970 as a way for countries to stop the spread of nuclear weapons, promote peaceful uses of nuclear energy, and encourage nuclear disarmament. The US, United Kingdom, France, China, and Russia are the treaty's only nuclear states, those that built and tested a nuclear weapon before 1967. Signatories agree not to transfer their weapons nor help non-nuclear states develop them. Those who didn't already have nuclear weapons agreed not to acquire them. The International Atomic Energy Agency is tasked with overseeing nuclear material and technology. If Iran withdraws, it would no longer be bound by these. As of 2025, 191 states are parties to the NPT, making it one of the most widely adhered to arms control agreements. But 4 nuclear weapons states, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea, are not members of the NPT, although Israel does not acknowledge nor confirm its nuclear weapons programs. Mark Fitzpatrick is an Associate Fellow for Strategy, Technology and Arms Control and the former Director of the Non-Proliferation Programme at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. He says now that Iran has been bombed by the US, he expects Tehran to leave the NPT and seek.
Iran has been threatening to pull out of the NPT for several years, threatening this as leverage in diplomacy. They've threatened it over various things. But now, given the enormity of the situation that Iran faces, I think it's beyond the time where they would use it for leverage. I think they would have to feel like they have to respond very visibly in some big fashion. And pulling out of the NPT is one of the few cards actually they can play on the diplomatic stage. If Iran pulls out of the NPT, it doesn't necessarily mean that any other country would, but Saudi Arabia has vowed to match Iran if Iran were to go for nuclear weapons. And if Iran pulls out of the NPT, that would be a signal that Iran was seeking to pursue nuclear weapons in secret. Not necessarily the case, but that was what everyone would understand it to mean. And so Saudi Arabia, I think, would think about pulling out itself. And there might be other countries. Egypt, for example, has long been concerned that Israel doesn't face any international monitoring. And Egypt says that's unfair. And so Egypt, if others pulled out, might think that it would be worth their while to pull out. And, there could be other countries around the world similarly fed up with the international nuclear war. Iran has been on the verge, you could say, for several months, even years. They've had this nuclear capability, but they haven't done it. Now, there's little reason for them not to do it, that they've been bombed. And so I fully expect Iran to pull out of the NPT, expel the inspectors, launch on a program of a nuclear weapons program with now all the resources of the country devoted to it. They don't have their top nuclear scientists. Israel assassinated 9 of them, but they have enough others who could be brought up to speed and could carry the program forward. And Iran has a critical advantage in this program because, they had produced over 400 kilograms of 60% highly enriched uranium, very close to the 90% needed for nuclear weapons. That 60% HEU, highly enriched uranium, was in cylinders which Iran surely removed before the attack and hid somewhere. So if they still have these cylinders of 60% enriched uranium, they don't have too much further to go to move it up to 90. They've got to build centrifuges, they've got to assemble the centrifuges, but I think they'll be able to do that within a year or so.
Well, UN nuclear watchdog chief Rafael Grossi has posted on X saying he is calling for an emergency meeting of the IAEA Board of Governors after the US military strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. The off-site radiation levels in Iran are not reported to have increased, he says, but the IAEA says it will provide more information when it becomes available. Jean-Marc Rickley is the head of the global risk at the Geneva Center for Security Policy. He's a specialist in contemporary warfare and explained how Iran may be weighing its response.
From the American perspective, this is considered as coercive diplomacy, so it's the threat or limited use of force in order to back foreign policy. It could actually be perceived differently in Iran, and so the range of possible response from Iran are from not doing anything, but in that case, it would have tremendous impact on the reputation of the regime, and it's not possible to do it, to attacking directly assets of the United States in the region or even beyond through terrorist attacks. And in between, you have a range of possible actions that could be taken. And so, as you can see, the bottom line for the Iranian regime will be first assess the capabilities, what they can do, and also try to figure out what will be the impact of the retaliation on U.S. response. Because if the U.S. is responding to a Iranian retaliation, it will be much more violent than what they did last night, and that could, in the end, jeopardize the survival of the regime. So, in the end, what the regime has to do is put into balance its survival, which is probably paramount, with the ability to keep its nuclear program active, and for now, it looks to be difficult.
And that's it from me, Laura Kyle, for this news hour. Handing you over now to my colleague, Neve Barker, who will be here in just a moment. And we are expecting speeches from members of the United Nations Security Council right at the top of the hour. You can see them gathering here. They are, of course, discussing the US and Israeli strikes on Iran. There is word that China, Russia and Pakistan are calling for a vote on a draft resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire.
Okay, guys, that's it for today, guys. Thank you for joining my live, guys. So thank you so much. Tomorrow we will listen again.
I need a peaceful community with no trouble because of my gender.
To a 7-year-old throne, a woman